Hey guys, JT here, and today we're exploring the Pendog Creative Archive, the Slasher update. So, three stories to read here from the characters, and then two more pages including where the slasher's heart is. Just letting you guys know right now, though, I do apologize for a throat clearing. I know, guys, I'm always sick when I do this video for some reason. Last time is because I had an upper respiratory infection. This time is because of allergy season and how brutal that has been. So I'll try my best, but we've got a story to read here or some reading to do. So we're in the theater, the slasher. To inhabit the form of another is, of course, not something unusual for an actor. As to take on the guise of something not of yourself can be seen inherent to the medium and method. Actors will consume their bodies as fictional. Actors will costume their bodies as fictional entities, and sometimes they might even don the form of those who were once alive and had since passed on. Yet for Trucy, garbed with a red jacket she had seen countless times during her course, to inhabit the identity of one Jane Perel was in all ways an uncomfortable and unsettling experience. The jacket was her size, had been picked out based on memory while thrifting. However, in some other way, the coat, the blue gloves, the shoes, each item hung loosely from her in some way which could not be accounted to mere size. To understand one's character often helps the actor to betray them. Could be through thought to be essential for such depictions. At this idea at this idea lay the problem that affected Trucy. She had hardly known Jane at all. Not to say she hadn't talked to Jane or perhaps even been one of her friends or hung out with the woman, yet they'd only shared one class together. Her in undergrad, now pursuing her master's, and Jane in her 2 year program, who'd they'd go out the door just as quickly as the time had passed. So to say she knew Jane would not be true. Of course, people cannot ever truly know the entirety of a person. Yet when Trucy pondered on Jane, it was like trying to make out the bottom of a muddy lake. Brief glimpses of things moved beneath the brackish water, yet never clear enough to identify. She knew Jane wasn't very funny, constantly trying to engage with her peers' humor by bringing up online jokes and incidents. But she had been kind, something that people say so commonly of others that it begins to lose meaning. Yet Trucy would tell you that Jane had been a special type of kind, altruistic, good at listening and good with talking things through. Jane had been angry horribly, terrifyingly angry. At least Trucy had thought so, but with time she'd begin to see that anger with a softer tint. Jane's always saying what was on her mind regardless of the consequences. Trucy had been so irritated with Jane when she was banned from participating in the student market. Thought she'd blown her shot at getting out there with needless anger and an unwillingness to shut up. The memory still struggles to resolve into a concrete opinion on whether Jane had been in the right. To inhabit the smile of an outfit associated with her friend also felt incredibly morbid to Trucy. Almost disrespectful even this contents in this context. Yet oddly, as soon as she thought this, a sense of familiarity washed over her, as if by wearing these clothes and participating in this play, she was being brought closer to a friend she'd always wished to know. It had been her who organized the play after all, without a definite purpose, a send-off, a memorial, a realization of Jane's ideas. Any of those things might have been the initial spark, yet none truly mattered. If anything, Trucy found herself having fun, meeting more people like Jane, realizing things about themselves they hadn't before, scurrying around the darkness, making stories of things not yet arrived, breaking into buildings to perfect her acting talent. Would this have made Jane smile? Would her friend have thought fondly of the student's behavior if she were here to witness their work? Much like the entirety of Jane, Trucy could not know, would never know, but she liked to think Jane would have been very happy if she could be here right now. And if you guys don't mind me monologuing a bit, that is a constant theme that kills me throughout this whole thing is that um Jane Jane was liked. She did kind of get a cult following and support, but she didn't see that or wasn't able to access that, and she just disappeared. We know she's in the cult, but not everybody at the college does. As we'll see later on, even those who were close to her mom didn't know where she was. So we're at the theater, and our buddy Josh here wobbles onto stage. Looking down with uneasy eyes upon his peers and since graduated students, Josh still was certain of whether this was the right thing to be doing. But going with the crowd had always been what he'd done best, even when others suffered for it. Josh had wanted to speak up if Jane had been barred from participated in the student market. Many had wanted to, yet nobody had. Everyone had been afraid of losing their scholarships, their degrees, losing the legitimacy this place promised to give their art. They'd all wanted to be legitimate artists so very badly, so they'd said nothing. So Josh had said nothing, and Jane had spent the final year in this place being heard by nothing, no one at all. Josh had always stood high above the ground, on the shoulders of others and the mountains he so loved to explore. Yet never could he hope to see above the consequences of his inaction. He tried so very hard to forget Jane, to forget the things of which she'd told their class about the people that existed in the country they'd never see. And yet every time he'd shut his eyes in the last month, they'd evaded his thoughts. Memories of a red jacket and an awkward smile trying to explain to him her grand theory on relationships and the violence that grew within them. They'd never truly been friends, he tells himself. They'd only known each other for 2 years, 1.5, maybe even less. But as is with human relationships, they can form exponential fast, exceptionally fast. And to deny that they can be so strong after weeks, months, years is a foolish thing to declare. They'd been friends in everything but name, and he'd let her be ostracized and cut out of the crowd with all the violence that entailed. It was like the school, the teachers, the staff had run the student body, the great whole of their body, under a scalpel, and removed Jane like some ma- malignant tumor, much in the same way you would feel empty without a heart. Before expiring, the student body had felt empty without Jane, a nearly unspoken yet important member of their number. She was not the heart. She was not great man or a woman. Just one of them. But she was one of them and she'd been removed. Maybe that's was why they'd been calling back to this place, to fulfill the performance of the body one last time, pretending to be inhabited by the presence of their missing part. That was the secret. Everyone missed her, missed Jane, missed the girl who thought nobody cared about her at all, missed the girl who pushed and drove everyone away, missed her now that she was gone. Gone. Josh's throat tightened a little thinking about that. They all missed Jane, and when she was and where she could not be said by anyone. Him and his friends had looked for her, asked around online, and even visited the town where she once lived. Something so extreme that Josh had been surprised by his own brashness. Josh had always stuck to the crowd, but he'd never gone out of it to look for Jane. There was nothing left of the place she called home. There were walls, there were doors, there were even things shaped like windows, but whatever had lived there had long died and left with it the repulsive odor of seawater. Another hint to the COA. I'm excited but afraid to know more about that, Cole. Because they're already giving Dorothy Dew a whale of a time, no pun intended, and I'm sure the same's for Jane. Same's gonna be said for Jane. Also, I'm kind of glad these are fairly short, because yeah, there I go with the cough. Thanks, Pollen, that increasingly wants to get more and more harsher every season. Three students are gathered in costume, reviewing their scripts. Script written from Zines, from conversations from an emerging urban legends and sounds heard while straight daydreaming at the shore. The play, although first proposed by one, had always been in the back of the students' minds. A subtle wish for things to have gone differently, and a deep desire to do well by someone once considered their peer. People had liked Jane more than she could ever know. A tragedy, yes, that this affection never manifested to anything more. Never saved her from returning to her mother's house alone, but yes, people had liked Jane quite a lot. Enough to organize this event. Enough to distribute objects bearing her name. Enough to poke and prod those who had contributed to her woes. Objectively, never was the strength of a crowd, nor mine for that matter, and as such it took months for those who knew Jane to drift together, to devise plans and pictures with which to remember her by. Some had been hurt by her voice, some had defended those very same words, many had felt confused by everything surrounding the woman, yet everyone had, in at least some small manner, been concerned for Jane. Truly, if there'd been more time, if Jane, after graduating, was not destined to return to the place in which no growth could be had, Jane would have found herself with all the community, all the friends, all the support she could have wanted, to be tethered to safety only by money, to be sent back to that tarry sunken home in such a short time. I think it broke some part of Jane, made her act in ways she never would have normally. Yet I too struggle with objectivity, so who is to say? In her misery, Jane had hated them all, cursed their names, and wished ruin upon them. Yet they still had gathered, still had organized all of this. The nature of which the event conducted itself was an oddity in that there was no concrete moment in which it formed a cohesive narrative. Vignettes transitioned into readings of poetry, zines, essays which Jane had written during her studies. The readings morphed into small skits, changed to songs, changed to shows to tell of art created with the ideas of Jane's work in mind. An odd sort of ritual in which theories and musings on the world and the world that was to come clashed with each other. Signs recreated into creative consequences. Students, many having graduated with Jane years ago, dressed up as her characters, her Zine imagery, Jane herself. Was it also the guilt that brought them together? That they'd let Jane slip out of their fingers? That they had spoken up as much as they should have for her? To care like and do right by someone are three different things, and sometimes they curl together, creating the twine with which someone is secured to safety, yet doing right. Advocated for someone that will always be matters in the end. It's this guilt. Perhaps it is this guilt of not acting upon their care of which drove the play into production. Yet, would this be unfair? Slightless to say that not one person acted upon their care for Jane, that among them many had spoken kinder than they normally would because they knew she was in a precarious state, her advocate for her to be brought along to places she'd normally be excluded from. How about all those times in which they had listened to Jane cry herself to exhaustion and tried to explain concepts like neutrality of the self or how she could make it work living by herself? It would be unfair, I begrudgingly admit, to exclude these things. Advice went unused, fear of assertion herself won out. Jane let herself be driven home in the end, a dark stain on everyone's conscience. A pitch black stain, blacker than black, darker than dark, yawning wider than the ocean, the murk, and the deep. A place in which ideas might be invited from elsewhere to inhabit and inform the actions of these bright young minds. Thoughts bubbled to the surface, and with them the compulsion to say and do things which they normally would not. Not a type of possession, no, not something so simple, but a sort of widespread phenomenon which manifested as breaking rules and misbehaving, telling lies, and bending the truth. Perhaps a better world would be vacated than possession, a ghost only in memory alone. As, and I say this truthfully, my part in these events was very small, very subtle, certainly not the trigger. So all this is happening not because of the slasher, but because the students wanted to help out Jane. So that's something to think about. And then for the hidden page, we have. Oh, I think I skipped it. Another child. And yes, this will let me see the things up close. All right. Well, look forward to this in the next part, guys. This is JT signing out. See you guys next time. Peace.